Hello and welcome to pmclounge.com. Today we are looking into the determine budget process. And while we discuss this process, we will also try to understand the concepts, important concepts related to this process. So, cost aggregation and funding limit reconciliation are important tools and techniques used in this process, while cost baseline and project funding requirements are important outputs of this process. So when we study determine budget process, we will also talk about these important tools and techniques and outputs of this process. As always, first link in the description is going to take you directly to the related article for this process. So if you're into reading an article rather than watching a video, first link in the description is going to take you there. Second link in the description will be the entire playlist of the cost management knowledge area. So every video that we have done, everything that you should know about this knowledge area, second link in the description is going to take you to the entire playlist. So do check that out. All right, with that being said, let's get started with the determine budget process. So once we are done with estimate costs, this is the process that comes after the estimate costs process. So after estimate costs is where you come to determine budget process. So now you may ask, what is the difference between estimate and a budget? We have already covered this. So I'll share a link to the video that I've already done on the difference between estimate and a budget. So that will be linked in the description. Do check that out. So there's a difference between estimate and budget, and that is why we have a separate estimate costs process after which we come up with the determine budget process. But just to make sure that you understand where we are right now in the cost management knowledge area, let's look at the PGKA mapping, the good old PGKA mapping. So this is the knowledge area, project cost management, and this is where we are at determine budget process. We've already discussed estimate costs and planned cost management. These processes are of course part of the planning process group. There's just one more process that is involved in the project cost management knowledge area, which is control costs, which we will be covering. So determine budget is what we are looking into today, and this is where it lies in the PGKA mapping. So let's move on. What are some of the inputs of the determine budget process? So this process is all about taking the outputs of the estimate costs process. So whatever that you generated as outputs of the estimate cost process, specifically the activity cost estimates and the basis of estimates, these two are very important inputs in the determine budget process. In addition to that, there are other inputs as well, which are part of the determine budget process, but these are actually the same inputs that you used in the estimate costs process. So nothing new to learn here. And over here at PMC Lounge, we don't really look into every single input, every single tools, every single output. Instead, we try to understand what this process does and how it achieves the goal of project management, how it basically contributes to the entire picture of project management, which is much more important. If you understand, if you learn, if you simply rot memorize the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques, you will not be able to clear the PMP exam. But if you understand what the process does, how it helps in the and how it fits into the larger picture, then and only then you'll have a fair chance at clearing the PMP exam. So the other inputs, like I said, are similar to what we have used in estimate cost process. The output of the estimate cost process, which are activity cost estimates and basis of estimates, also act as an input in this process that we are talking about, which is of course determine budget. Let's move on. So let's jump into the tools and techniques of the determine budget process. And the first one that we are discussing is cost aggregation. So this is something important, something new, and thus you should know about it. So what is cost aggregation all about? So in the cost aggregation process, you are rolling up the estimates of all activities up to the control account level, and this entire process is known as cost aggregation. So all that you're doing is adding up all the estimates below the control account so that you have a value of the control account. Now, what is control account? I'll share a link in the description to the video where we have already talked about control account. But just for a quick reference, let me remind you that control accounts are predetermined points where scope, cost, and schedule are integrated and compared to the earned value for performance measurement. So where are these points? Where are these predetermined points? We are talking about the WBS here. So in the WBS, you have predetermined points which could be above the work package level as well, and up to the control point, whatever estimates that you have for each activity, you roll it up, you add all of them, and this process is known as cost aggregation. So once you have used the cost aggregation tool, you will have the cost required for each control account, the budget required for each control account, and that is why cost aggregation is an important tool. So how much each control account or work package is going to cost is what you will get to know once you apply the cost aggregation tool. An important point to note here is that one control account may have more than one work package as well. So here, when you perform cost aggregation, you will get to know how much each control account is costing, not just the work package. It is possible that one control account may have multiple work packages, but it is also possible that one control account may have just one work package. So in that case, you will get to know how much that work package costs, making use of course, the cost aggregation tool. Before we move further, a quick reminder, head over to pmclounge.com/pmp-training. This is where we have linked all the PMP courseware articles and videos. Okay, the next tool that we are going to talk about is known as funding limit reconciliation. Again, this is also very, very important, and this is also important from PMP exam point of view as well. So funding limit, it is pretty straightforward. This is the limit of your funding, right? This has a pretty straightforward meaning. But reconciliation is a word which may confuse some people here. So reconciliation may mean the restoration of friendly relations, the re-establishing of cordial relations, getting two things to correspond, or the action of making one view or belief compatible with another. This is something I'd like you to remember here. This is what reconciliation mean when we talk about project management, when we talk specifically about funding limit reconciliation. So let's talk a bit more about funding limit reconciliation. So no project has unlimited money to spend. That is a fact of life. Now, you need to ensure that the project is delivered within the amount that the company is willing to spend. And the company, by the company here, you may also include a major stakeholder here whose name is the sponsor. So how much does the sponsor wants to spend on your project is something that you should know of. That is the funding limit of the project. So reconciliation, like I said, you need to remember this, the action of making one view or belief compatible with another. So one view or belief of the company, of the project sponsor, is the funding limit. And that is why reconciliation here refers to making the company's view or the sponsor's view of funding limit on the project compatible with the project manager. You as a project manager should agree to this view, should reconcile with this view of how much the company or the sponsor wants to spend on your project. Now, what would happen if the project goes beyond this limit, beyond the funding limit? Let's say the project, the budget of the project was 90,000 US dollars. The funding limit reconciliation, the funding limit was 100,000 US dollars. What if your project goes beyond this funding limit? That is when you will go to your project sponsor and you will speak to him. You will speak to him if it is possible to cut down the scope of the project. Maybe we are delivering too many features. Can we cut down the scope? Can we reduce the number of features going out as part of this project so that you can meet the funding limit of 100,000 US dollars? Or is it possible that the sponsor can increase the funding limit from 100,000 US dollars to 150,000 US dollars so that the scope need not be cut and you will be able to deliver the entire project with the new funding limit. So this is all about funding limit reconciliation. Like I said, it is a way to reconcile the view of the sponsor or the company about how much the project should cost, how much they are willing to spend on the project, and reconciling this with the project manager's point of view as well. Some of the other tools and techniques that are used in this process are reserve analysis and expert judgment, both of which we have already discussed. Links will be available in the description to both of these. Let's move on. All right, let's talk about the outputs of this process. The first one is cost baseline, and this is an important output of the determined budget process. So cost baseline is a snapshot of the planned project budget. Just like schedule baseline, just like scope baseline, they are also snapshots of how much the baseline cost of the project, the baseline scope or the baseline schedule of the project look like. Now we call it a snapshot because at certain point in time when you are planning the project, this is what the baseline cost looks like. But when you actually perform the project, so this was the snapshot of of the project, the cost of the project, the baseline cost of the project in the planning stage. But 3 months down the line, when you have done 3 months worth of work in the project, what does your cost now look like? And you are going to compare this actual against the baseline. This baseline is of course the snapshot. So this comparison is important, and to do this comparison is why you have baseline, right? So it is similar to scope and schedule, like I said earlier, where the whole idea is to measure, and this measurement, this comparison is done in the monitoring and controlling process. And this is where you measure how you are doing versus what you planned. So whatever you planned was the snapshot, and how you're doing is the actual progress that you have made. The other important output of this process is project funding requirements. Now, how helpful is a single number for the overall project budget? So if somebody came to you and asked, what is the budget of your project? And you say 100,000 US dollars. How helpful is that? If that person who asked this question is the CEO of the company, he might be good with that number. He doesn't really care to know more details. But if that person who asked you, what is the budget of your project, is your immediate manager, he would need more information, right? He wouldn't be down with understanding and knowing just a single number for the overall project budget, right? So a plan on how and when, these are important questions. How, when, and how much of the $100,000 project budget that you have will be spent is absolutely required. So you need a plan of how, when, and how much of the project budget will be spent. Now, these plans are documented in the project funding requirements, and that is what makes project funding requirements so important. So, to your immediate manager, to the CEO of the company, you will give a single number. To your immediate manager, you will give the project funding requirements, wherein it will contain the plans of how, when, and how much money your project requires. Based on this, based on these project funding requirements, the sponsor may decide to allocate funds for your project at several intervals or project phases, right? So it is possible that the sponsor of the project allocates certain money out of the 100,000 US dollars for your design phase, certain money for your development phase, certain money for your testing phase, right? So he or she may allocate money, allocate funds to your project based on the project phases or in several other intervals. So this is also important, that you have the project funding requirements with you so that the sponsor can make such decisions. Moving on, this is a very important formula. The project funding requirements is equals to cost baseline. Now the cost baseline also includes contingency reserve plus the management reserve. What is the difference between contingency reserve and management reserve is available in the reserve analysis video, which is also linked in the description. A quick few points here based on the project funding requirements. You will be able to ensure that your project has money when it's needed and have enough to cover risks, that is the contingency and management reserves, because the project funding requirements includes both contingency reserve and management reserves. The risks, right, the unknown risks, the known risks, both of these are covered with contingency reserve and management reserve. If you're still wondering what known unknown risks are, what contingency and management reserves are, link is in the description for the reserve analysis video. Do check that out. Finally, you should note that in certain texts you will find project funding requirements named as the cost budget. So if you get a question in the PMP exam that talks about cost budget and not about project funding requirements, you should know that these two are actually the same thing, right? So this is also important from PMP exam questions perspective. That's all that we had in this video. Hope we were able to cover the entire process in this video. Do hit the like button if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay notified whenever we upload a new video. And don't forget to check out the website pmclounge.com, your number one free PMP resource with so many different helpful articles and videos. Thank you.